I never imagined that the moment my grandson pulled at my sleeve and whispered those words, my entire world would split open like fragile glass, shattering on the floor. Grandma Eli said with wide, frightened eyes, "Mom isn't sick. She's faking it." My breath caught my chest, locked, as if invisible hands had wrapped around me. I wanted to dismiss it, to hush him with a smile, to blame it on the wild imagination of a child, but his trembling hands were already holding out the little phone his father had given him to watch cartoons. The screen glowed in the dim hospital hallway, and what I saw drained the blood from my body. There was Chandra, my daughter-in-law, the woman I had cared for, as if she were my own flesh and blood, lying in bed surrounded by machines, her face pale, her lips sealed in silence. For weeks, we had been told she was in a coma, trapped between life and death. And then, in that flickering recording, she slowly opened her eyes. She looked around, cautious, alert. She sat up just slightly, reached for the glass of water, sipped, and then lay back down, arranging herself perfectly still, like an actress waiting for the next cue. My throat closed. My stomach dropped, and I felt like I was falling through a hole in the ground. That wasn't sickness. That wasn't coma. That was theater, cruel theater played against my son, my grandson and me. I swallowed hard, forcing my lips into a smile so Eli wouldn't see the storm raging in me. "Eli," I whispered back, "you mustn't tell your father about this. Not yet." He nodded quickly, his little body pressed against me as if he knew he had stumbled upon something dangerous, something too heavy for his small heart. And all the while, just down the hall, my son Marcus was slumped in a chair, clutching his head, drowning himself in grief, believing his wife might never return to him. He had lost weight. His hair was messy, his once strong presence dimmed to a shadow. He was convinced the love of his life lay on that bed, fighting for each breath, while in truth she was playing us all. I looked at Marcus, and my chest burned with a fury I had never known. What kind of woman could stage such cruelty? What kind of human heart could deceive not only a husband, but a child? I confess to you, the viewer of my story, I was torn in two. A part of me wanted to storm into that room, throw open the door, and scream at her to get up to show my son the truth, to rip off the mask she had carefully worn. But another part of me, an older, quieter part, knew that storms sometimes need patience. If I revealed the truth too soon, Marcus might call me insane, accuse me of paranoia, or worse, turn against me to protect her. You see, he loved her with a blind devotion, a devotion that had already cost him his health, his joy, and nearly his sanity. And Eli, sweet Eli, was too young to carry the burden of his mother's betrayal. I had to protect him, even if it meant swallowing the acid burning my throat. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the cracked ceiling of my small house, hearing the creaks and groans of the old wood. I asked myself over and over, why would Chandra do this? Why would a woman fake a coma? Was it money? Was it revenge? Was it some twisted game with the hospital director I had seen her whispering to? Or was it something darker, something I couldn't yet imagine? My mind spun with images, insurance policies, secret debts, stolen signatures. I thought about the times she had asked Marcus for money, about the way she sometimes disappeared with excuses of shopping trips that never quite made sense. And the more I thought, the more the questions pressed down, like stones on my chest. The memory of Eli's voice haunted me. "Mom isn't sick. Could you imagine a child that young forced to discover such a horror, watching his mother pretend to be near death? Do you understand what it means for a boy's trust in the world to fracture so early?" That was what shattered me more than anything. It wasn't only my son being destroyed, it was my grandson's innocence stolen by the deceit of the one person who should have protected him most. And here I was, 68 years old, weary from years of kneading bread before dawn at my bakery, trying to keep our lives afloat, and now I had to carry this unbearable truth. I ask you, if you were in my place, would you have told Marcus right away? Or would you have waited watching gathering proof, protecting your grandson until the right moment? Comment 1 if you believe I should have exposed her immediately. Hit like if you think waiting was the only way to protect my family from shattering completely. I tried to pray that night the way my mother taught me long ago, whispering words for strength. But the prayer stuck, twisted by doubt. I felt betrayed not just by Chandra, but by my own naive trust. I had welcomed her into our family, defended her when neighbors whispered, cared for her as a daughter. And now she lay in that hospital bed like a saintly victim, while behind closed doors she played with our lives. My heart pounded like a war drum, and I knew this was only the beginning of something far darker. Because if she could fake a coma, she could plan worse. And if a doctor was helping her, then the web was larger than I could see. I stood the next morning before the mirror, my reflection pale, my hair tangled, my eyes bloodshot from sleeplessness. "You must be strong," I whispered to myself, "for Marcus, for Eli." But inside, a storm brewed, because strength sometimes means fighting, and I was about to enter a fight I never asked for, one I feared might destroy what was left of my family. Still, I could not look away, not after seeing the truth with my own eyes. The truth was awake now, even if she pretended to sleep. And truth has a way of burning everything around it until only ashes remain. The first signs that something was wrong came so quietly, I almost convinced myself I imagined them. I had grown used to the rhythm of the machines in Chandra's room, the beeping of the monitors, the soft whoosh of the ventilator. It was a cruel lullaby, but after weeks it became familiar. Yet there were moments, brief, almost imperceptible, when the monitors flatlined into perfect stability, her vitals calm, as if she were merely resting after a long day. No fluctuations, no tremors, no signs of the coma's chaos that the doctors described so gravely. Then suddenly, when Marcus entered, the beeping would spike the numbers, jump as though rehearsed. At first I thought it was coincidence, a cruel trick of fate, but the pattern repeated too neatly to ignore. One afternoon, I asked the nurse at the station about it. She smiled politely, too politely, and told me machines always had quirks. She avoided my eyes, shuffling papers, eager to move me along. I left with a hollow in my chest, more certain that something sinister hid beneath the hospital's sterile walls. I began to watch more closely. Every day after finishing the bakery's deliveries, I would hurry to the hospital holding Eli's hand as we walked those long, endless halls. I memorized every flicker of the lights above every squeak of my worn shoes against the tile. And every time we reached her room, the air felt heavy with performance, as though the walls themselves were actors hiding secrets. I noticed little things, the faint smudge of lipstick at the corner of her mouth one morning, though Marcus swore she hadn't moved in weeks, the fresh water in her glass when I knew no nurse had been inside, the subtle shift in her hair as if she had adjusted it herself. Each sign was a whisper, telling me what my heart already screamed: she was awake. Eli noticed too. He would tug at my sleeve, whispering questions he didn't dare ask aloud when his father was near. "Grandma, why does Mommy's blanket change sides? Or why was her cup full when yesterday it was empty?" I hushed him, telling him not to worry, but I saw the confusion in his young eyes, the way he carried truths too heavy for his small frame. It broke me to see him already learning the weight of betrayal. One evening after closing the bakery, I returned to the hospital alone. Marcus had fallen into his routine of sitting silently in the waiting room with a bottle hidden in his coat pocket, and Eli was asleep at home with Mrs. Peterson, our neighbor. I moved quietly through the halls, my senses sharp, my heart drumming against my ribs. The hospital at night was a different creature. Shadows stretched, long silence pressing like a suffocating blanket. I stood outside her room watching through the glass. At first, nothing. She lay there, as always, the picture of fragility, the perfect patient in endless sleep. But then I saw it, her finger twitch her lips, purse ever so slightly as if she were fighting a smile. I gasped and pressed my hand over my mouth to silence it. She was playing a role even now. I wanted to burst in, but fear held me. What if she caught me and found a way to twist the story? What if Marcus refused to believe me? I lingered until my legs ached, but she remained still once more, the perfect actress. Later that night, as I lay awake listening to the creaks of my old house, I thought I heard her laugh. I told myself it was impossible, just the echo of memory. But deep down I knew. Laughter has a sound unlike any machine, and that night it seeped into my bones. The next day I decided to test my own sanity. I asked Marcus if he had noticed anything unusual. He looked at me with bloodshot eyes, his voice hollow. "Mom, she hasn't moved. Don't torture yourself." His tone was sharp, almost defensive, as though my words threatened the last shred of hope he clung to. I didn't push further. Not yet. But I left with my heart heavier, realizing I stood alone in this suspicion. That night, unable to resist the gnawing in my gut, I returned once more to the hospital. The halls were quiet, the fluorescent lights humming softly above. I walked slowly, my shoes barely making a sound. When I reached her door, I stopped. The machines hummed, steady and predictable. I leaned closer, pressing my ear to the cold glass, listening. And then I heard it. A sound that froze me in place. A soft, unmistakable laugh. It wasn't loud, but it carried the warmth of someone alive, alert, amused even. My chest tightened. My eyes darted to the bed, but her face was serene, lips sealed, eyes closed. It was as if she mocked me, daring me to call her bluff. I staggered back, heart-pounding palms slick with sweat. That laugh echoed through my head long after I left the hospital, long after I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling. It became the proof I could not unhear. She wasn't dying. She wasn't unconscious. She was awake, playing us and laughing at the cruel game. And I tell you now, as I confess to you, what would you have done in my place? Would you have stormed in, dragged her upright and forced the world to see the lie? Or would you like me hold back, waiting, watching, knowing the truth but gathering the strength for the storm to come? The next morning, I arrived earlier than usual before Marcus, before Eli, before the hospital filled with the restless footsteps of visitors. I wanted silence. I wanted to observe without interruption. As I walked down the corridor, the sharp smell of disinfectant clung to the back of my throat, and the cold light of dawn filtered through narrow windows, turning the white walls into something almost sinister. I paused outside her room, watching through the glass. Chandra lay as still as ever, the perfect picture of a patient in deep coma. But my eyes searched for the smallest betrayal, the flutter of an eyelid, the twitch of a finger, the shifting of her chest that didn't match the rhythm of the machine. Nothing. She was good, too good. It was then that Sarah appeared, the young nurse who had been assigned to Chandra's care. She was a petite woman with dark circles under her eyes, her blonde hair pulled tightly back as if every strand carried the weight of secrets. She entered the room with her cart moving quietly, gently washing Chandra's arms, adjusting tubes, changing bandages. At first I thought she was simply doing her duty, but then I noticed her eyes. They flickered toward the window every few seconds, darting like a cornered rabbit. She avoided my gaze, her movements quick, mechanical, almost rehearsed. My suspicion hardened into certainty. Sarah knew something. I waited until she left the room, pushing her cart down the hall, her shoes squeaking softly on the polished floor. Summoning courage I didn't know I had, I stepped out from behind the corner. "Good morning, Sarah," I said, my voice calm, though my chest thundered. She startled, her pen slipping from her hand, clattering onto the floor. She bent to pick it up, stammering, "Oh, Mrs. Hayes, you frightened me." I smiled, but my eyes did not. "Tell me, Sarah," I asked slowly, "have you ever noticed anything unusual with my daughter-in-law movements, perhaps moments when she seemed awake, her face drained of color?" She shook her head too quickly, eyes wide, lips trembling. I don't understand what you mean," she muttered, clutching the chart to her chest like a shield. But her reaction spoke louder than words. My question had pierced through her thin armor. I leaned closer, lowering my voice so no one else could hear. "Your hands are shaking, child. That tells me everything." Something is wrong, and you know it." She froze, her eyes glistening as though tears were about to spill. Then in a whisper, so faint I almost missed it, she said, "I'm only following orders. Please don't involve me. I have no choice." Before I could press further, another nurse rounded the corner and Sarah bolted away, her cart rattling as she fled down the hall. I stood there, stunned, my mind spinning. Orders. From whom and why? That word gnawed at me all day as I tried to keep the bakery running, kneading dough with trembling hands, watching the ovens as if answers might rise with the bread. Orders meant complicity. Orders meant someone higher up was involved. And I thought of Dr. Thorne, the hospital director, his calm, measured words the day he told us Chandra was in a deep coma. His voice had been too smooth, too practiced, like an actor reciting a script. My stomach clenched. That night, after I closed the bakery and sent Eli to bed, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the flickering bulb above me. I thought of the past, of the first time Chandra entered our lives. I remembered Marcus bringing her home for Sunday dinner, her smile radiant, her laughter filling the small house. She had looked me in the eyes, calling me Mom as if I were truly her own. Back then, I believed her sincerity. Back then, I thought she was the blessing my son deserved. But over the years, small cracks had formed. I remembered one evening when I found a thick envelope tucked into her purse. Insurance papers. When I asked about them, she waved me off, saying it was just routine. But why would a young woman with no steady job need multiple policies in her name? I pushed the thought aside then, but now, in the harsh light of betrayal, those papers came back with a new, terrifying clarity. The more I remembered, the heavier the burden grew. The expensive handbags she bought when Marcus could barely afford rent. The nights she claimed to be working late yet returned home with perfume lingering on her clothes. The subtle way she asked Marcus about his life insurance, framing it as concern for the family's future. All the pieces I had ignored now fit together like shards of a broken mirror, reflecting a truth I wished I had never seen. And as if the past wasn't enough to torment me, the present had its own cruelties. Marcus barely spoke to me anymore. When I tried to share my suspicions, he brushed me off with a cold "Mom, please stop imagining things." His eyes were hollow, his voice raw, but his faith in Chandra remained unshaken. He was drowning, but he clung to the illusion of her love, as though it were the only thing keeping him afloat. His denial left me more isolated than ever. Even the neighbors began to whisper. "Poor Mrs. Hayes," they said. "She's getting old, losing her mind." Each word sliced deeper, leaving me bleeding inside. Still, I could not let go of what I had seen and heard. I needed proof, undeniable proof. I needed to catch her in the act. And so I began to watch her more closely, not only through the glass, but by lingering in the halls, listening for any sound, any slip. My heart raced with every creak of the floor, every shadow that moved across the wall. Then it happened. The moment that turned suspicion into certainty. It was past midnight when I returned to the hospital once more, unable to silence the gnawing inside me. The halls were nearly empty, the air thick with silence. As I turned the corner toward Chandra's room, I stopped dead. The bed was empty. For one frozen instant, I thought she had died, that somehow she had been taken without notice. But then at the far end of the hall, I saw her. My daughter-in-law, the woman the world believed to be locked in coma, was walking slowly, carefully, her hospital gown fluttering around her ankles. Her eyes darted left and right, cautious, alert. I pressed myself against the wall, holding my breath as she passed by, not seeing me. She moved with ease, not a trace of weakness, her steps steady and confident. My heart pounded so loud I feared she might hear it. She disappeared into the office of Dr. Thorne, the door closing silently behind her. I stood there trembling, my fingernails digging into my palms, my whole body shaking. The truth was no longer a suspicion. It was real, alive, undeniable. I stumbled back down the hall, my mind ablaze, my chest aching. My legs felt weak, but I forced myself forward, away from the scene. She was awake. She was conspiring with the hospital director. And all the while, my son sat just a few rooms away, drinking himself into oblivion, believing his wife was fighting for her life. I tell you, my heart broke 1,000 times that night, because it wasn't only betrayal, it was cruelty. To let a man waste away in grief, to let a child pray for his mother's recovery, while she walked freely in secret. I ask you now, those who hear my story, if you saw what I saw, if you caught a loved one pretending to be near death, conspiring in shadows, would you stay silent, or would you risk everything to tear the mask away? Comment 1 if you would expose her immediately. Hit like. If you believe the time for truth must be chosen carefully, like the strike of lightning before the storm. After that night, when I saw her walking freely down the hall, I knew nothing would ever be the same. The truth had shifted from suspicion to certainty, and with that certainty came a weight almost unbearable. I wanted to shake Marcus awake to force him to see what was happening right in front of us. But each time I opened my mouth, I saw the hollow look in his eyes, the weariness carved into his face, and I stayed silent. He was barely clinging to life as it was drowning in grief that wasn't even real. If I tore away the last illusion he held, I feared it would kill him before the truth ever could. So I carried the burden alone. Every morning I rose at 3 to prepare bread, the smell of yeast and flour filling the small bakery like it always had. But what once gave me comfort now tasted bitter in my mouth. The customers still came, still laughed, still chatted, but I moved like a ghost among them. My hands worked dough my lips, forced smiles, yet my mind never left that hospital corridor where I had seen betrayal with my own eyes. And Marcus, oh my son, he changed before me. He stopped eating, stopped sleeping, and when he did sleep, it was with a bottle in his hand. More nights than I can count. I found him slumped in a chair outside her room. His shirt wrinkled, his eyes red, the sour stench of bourbon clinging to him like a second skin. When I tried to rouse him, he snapped at me with words he would have never spoken in another time. "Mom, stop it. Don't you dare tell me she won't make it. She will. She has to." His voice cracked, his tears spilling, and I had to turn away, swallowing my own anger because how could I tell him that the woman he worshipped was mocking us all? The more Marcus drowned himself, the more I became invisible to him. He no longer asked me about the bakery, no longer cared about bills piling on the kitchen table, no longer looked me in the eyes. His entire being revolved around that room, that bed, that woman who pretended to fight for life while she planned something darker. My heart broke, not just for him, but for Eli. That little boy needed his father, but his father was gone, lost to a bottle, lost to a lie. And Eli, sweet Eli, grew quieter every day. He used to chatter endlessly about school, about his drawings, about superheroes. Now he came home and sat silently at the table, his backpack still on, staring at nothing. His teacher pulled me aside one afternoon, concern heavy in her voice. "Mrs. Hayes, he doesn't play with the other children anymore. He just sits alone." Is something happening at home? I forced a smile, lied through my teeth. "He's just tired, don't worry." But inside, guilt clawed at me. Eli was carrying a secret bigger than any child should bear, the secret of his mother's deceit. And I was asking him to keep it locked away for the sake of survival. Neighbors began to whisper too. When they saw Marcus stumbling home late at night or heard the arguments muffled through our thin walls, they shook their heads. In the grocery store, I overheard them murmuring, "Such a shame." The Hayes family was once so respectable. Each word stung like nettles. They didn't know the truth. They thought my family was crumbling because of tragedy. But the real tragedy was that it was all a performance, and the actress was thriving in the spotlight of our pain. I was being pushed into isolation. Marcus had no strength to listen. The neighbors judged from a distance. Even the women who once bought bread from me daily now avoided my gaze, as though my sorrow might infect them. And at night, when Eli finally fell asleep, I sat alone in the kitchen staring at the mountain of bills, hospital fees, school payments, bakery expenses. Every number was a blade carving deeper into me. I had worked all my life to give my family stability, and now it was slipping through my fingers like water. The hospital staff began treating me differently too. When I asked questions about Chandra's condition, they answered with clipped tones, their eyes sliding away. I caught them exchanging glances when they thought I wasn't looking. It was as though they knew I was beginning to see through the illusion and wanted to keep me in the dark. That only sharpened my resolve. I had to gather evidence, something undeniable, something that could shatter the mask she wore. But the more I watched, the greater the danger grew. One evening, as I locked up the bakery, I found an envelope taped to the back door. My heart raced as I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper with words scrawled in thick black ink. "Stay out of this. If you value your family, keep your mouth shut." My hands shook so violently the paper nearly slipped from my grasp. My stomach twisted. They knew I was watching. They knew I was close. I pressed the letter to my chest, staring at the dark alley behind the bakery, half expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. But the alley was empty, silent except for the distant hum of traffic. I locked the door quickly, my pulse hammering in my ears. Whoever left that message wanted me afraid, and I was. I won't lie, I was terrified. Not just for myself, but for Marcus, for Eli. If Chandra and whoever aided her could fake a coma, manipulate a hospital, and silence a nurse, what else were they capable of? That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps. Every flicker of the curtain felt like eyes watching. I sat in the dark, clutching the note until dawn broke the paper crumpled and damp from my sweat. And with every hour that passed, the fear inside me deepened. But so did the fire. Because fear can paralyze or it can ignite. And I knew I could not let them win. The next morning, I tucked the letter inside my apron pocket next to my heart and went about the day as if nothing had changed. But every time I looked at Marcus, I wanted to scream the truth. Every time I looked at Eli, I wanted to promise him safety. Yet silence pressed down on me like chains. I wondered if they could see it in my eyes, the storm building behind them, the secret clawing to be unleashed. And still I carried on. I kneaded bread wiped flour from my hands, forced smiles for customers. But behind those smiles, I was calculating, remembering every detail. The lipstick on her lips, the twitch of her hand, the whisper of Sarah, the empty bed in the night, the shadow slipping into Thorne's office. Each memory was a weapon I sharpened in silence, waiting for the moment to strike. But the letter, oh, that letter, was the heaviest of all. I would take it out at night, unfold it, stare at the cruel words written there, and wonder who had slipped so close to me, who had the audacity to threaten a mother, a grandmother, a woman who had already lost so much. It was then I realized this wasn't just about Chandra anymore. This was bigger. There were others pulling the strings. And if I wasn't careful, my family would pay the price. I ask you now, if you were in my shoes, holding that envelope in trembling hands, hearing your grandson whisper the unspeakable, watching your son drink himself into oblivion, would you keep silent out of fear, or would you rise against the storm, knowing it might consume you? Comment 1, if you believe silence is the same as surrender. Hit like. If you think truth, no matter how dangerous, must always be revealed. The threats didn't stop with the letter. They grew louder, heavier, as though the darkness outside my small bakery had taken human shape and walked straight into my life. It happened on a sweltering afternoon. I had just pulled the last batch of bread from the oven, sweat dripping down my back, my body aching from hours of labor. I was wiping the counter when a heavy knock rattled the front door. The shop was closed. The back in the morning sign already hung, so at first I thought it was a mistake. But the pounding came again harder, this time shaking the glass in its frame. I opened the door and 3 men filled the entrance like a shadow falling over me. Tattoos snaked down their arms, their eyes sharp, predatory. The one in front held out a crumpled piece of paper. His voice was like gravel. "Where is Chandra time to pay?" My hands trembled as I took the paper. Scrawled numbers leapt out at me, a sum so huge my stomach turned. I shook my head, my voice breaking. "You're mistaken. My daughter-in-law is in a coma. She's in Piedmont General, she can't." They laughed, a cruel hollow sound that made the hairs rise on my neck. "Coma," the leader sneered. "Do you think we're fools? She promised to settle her debt. If she plays smart, maybe you'll all sleep easy. But if not..." He leaned closer, his breath hot on my face. "This family won't have peace." Behind him, the other two shifted their tattoos, writhing like snakes under the fluorescent light. I looked past them and saw neighbors peering from their doorways, their eyes wide whispers spreading like wildfire. Shame and fear clawed through me. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to steady. "Please, give me time. I don't know anything about these debts, but I'll find out." The leader's mouth curled into a smile without warmth. He pointed at my house across the street. "1 week. If there's no money, sell the house. Pay up. Or else." They turned and walked away, their heavy boots pounding against the pavement until the sound disappeared. I collapsed onto the steps, sweat pouring down my face, not from heat, but from terror. My heart hammered as I clutched the paper in my hands, the numbers blurring through my tears. So it was true. Chandra hadn't just been pretending for sympathy or insurance. She was running from debt tied to dangerous men who now stood at my door. That night I confronted Marcus. He was slouched in the kitchen, an empty bottle rolling near his foot. I slammed the crumpled paper onto the table. "Marcus, look at this. Do you know what your wife has done?" He barely lifted his head, his eyes bloodshot. He glanced at the paper, then back at me, his jaw tightening. "Stop it, Mom. Stop trying to destroy her. She's sick. She's fighting for her life, and you bring me lies." His voice rose raw with fury. "You want me to believe my wife would do this, that she would risk everything." My chest burned. I saw her, Marcus. I saw her walking. I saw her with my own eyes. She is not who you think she is. His fist slammed against the table, making the empty bottle jump. "Enough you hate her because she's not you, because she's the only woman I've ever truly loved. You want her gone so you can have me and Eli all to yourself. Admit it." The words pierced deeper than any knife. My own son, the boy I had raised with sleepless nights and broken hands, now looked at me with suspicion, with anger, with blame. I stood there, trembling, tears stinging my eyes, but he turned away, stumbling back toward the living room where his grief and his bottle waited. I pressed my hands against the counter to keep from falling. The house was silent except for Marcus's uneven breaths in the other room and Eli's soft snore upstairs. I had never felt so alone. The days that followed blurred together. The bakery became a prison, each loaf I pulled from the oven heavier than the last. Customers still smiled, but I felt their eyes on me, heard their whispers as soon as I turned away. Poor woman, losing her mind, blaming her daughter-in-law. Their pity stung worse than cruelty. The bills piled higher, the weight on my shoulders unbearable. At night, I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by numbers that mocked me: hospital expenses, school tuition, bakery repairs. I rubbed my aching temples, staring at the photo of Robert, my late husband, on the wall. "What would you do?" I whispered. "How would you protect them?" But the frame only stared back in silence. It was in that silence that I broke. One evening, after a day so long my legs barely carried me, I walked into the bakery to close up. My body screamed with exhaustion, my heart with despair. I bent down to lock the cash register, and the world spun. My knees buckled, the floor rushed up, and I collapsed among the smell of flour and yeast. For a moment, I thought this was the end. My chest heaved, my breath shallow. But my right hand refused to release what it clutched: the small USB drive Eli had given me, the one that held the video of his mother's betrayal. Even as my body gave out, even as darkness pulled at the edges of my vision, I held onto that proof with every ounce of strength left in me. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about truth. And truth needed to live even if I didn't. When I opened my eyes again, the ceiling above me was spinning. My head throbbed, my body felt like lead, but the first thing I noticed was that my right hand was still clenched tight. The small USB drive dug into my palm, leaving marks on my skin. I almost laughed through the pain. Even as I collapsed, even as I nearly slipped away, I had held on to the truth. Mrs. Peterson, our neighbor, hovered above me, her voice frantic. "Ellie, you scared me half to death. I found you on the bakery floor. What were you thinking working yourself to death like this?" I tried to answer, but my throat was raw, my chest tight. She gave me water and insisted I rest. But how could I rest? The world around me was collapsing and my son was blind, my grandson silent, my family unraveling in the shadow of a lie. That night, lying weak in bed, I stared at the USB drive on my nightstand. I knew I could no longer carry this fight alone. My strength was failing and fear was closing in. If Chandra had debts to dangerous men, if she had allies inside the hospital, then this was bigger than me. I needed help, real help. So the next morning before the bakery opened, I drove across town to a small office tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop. The wooden sign above the door was faded, Davis Investigations. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and stale coffee. Behind a battered desk sat Davis, a man I had not seen in nearly 20 years. He had been my late husband, Robert's closest friend, a former police officer with eyes as sharp as broken glass. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, removing his glasses and standing. "It's been a long time. What brings you here looking like you've seen a ghost?" I sat my hands trembling and poured everything out. Eli's whisper, the video of Chandra drinking water, Sarah's terrified confession, the night I saw my daughter-in-law walking into Dr. Thorne's office, the letter of threat the debt collectors at my door. My voice cracked as I spoke, but I forced myself to continue showing him the video on the USB. Davis watched in silence, his brow furrowing deeper with each passing second. When it ended, he leaned back, steepling his fingers under his chin. "This," he said, slowly, "is no small matter. What you have here isn't just family drama. It's fraud, conspiracy, maybe even something worse. If your daughter-in-law and the hospital director are involved, they're playing a dangerous game, and you and your grandson are standing right in the middle of it." I felt the tears well, but I refused to let them fall. So what do? How do I protect my family when my own son won't believe me? Davis tapped the desk with his fingers, a habit he'd always had when thinking. "First, you don't breathe a word of this to Marcus. Not yet. He's too far gone, too blinded by grief. He'd only warn her, or worse, turn against you. Second, you let me handle the digging. I still have friends in places that matter. I'll watch, I'll follow, I'll gather proof you can't ignore. But you need to stay quiet. Pretend nothing's wrong. If they suspect you're onto them, you and Eli could be in danger." His words both chilled and relieved me. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sliver of hope, though fragile. I nodded. "I trust you, Davis. Please, don't let my grandson grow up in this lie." Leaving his office, the weight on my chest shifted. I was still afraid, still exhausted, but I was no longer alone. For the first time, I had an ally, someone who could see the truth without flinching. That night, I returned to the hospital with Eli. Marcus was there, as always, slumped by Chandra's bed, whispering to her still body. I forced a smile for him, though inside fire burned. As Marcus stepped into the hall to take a call, Eli tugged at my sleeve. "Grandma, did you show anyone the video?" His voice trembled with both fear and hope. I knelt and cupped his face. "Yes, sweetheart. A good man is helping us now. You did the right thing recording this. One day your father will see the truth." Eli's eyes filled with tears, and he threw his arms around my neck. In that embrace, I found my reason to keep going. But my role was changing. I was no longer just a grieving mother-in-law, no longer a woman begging for scraps of honesty. I was gathering weapons in silence, waiting for the moment to strike. I began to keep a small notebook in my apron, writing every detail, the times nurses entered, the moments. Chandra's vitals shifted, the expressions on Sarah's face, the strange men loitering near the hospital's back door. Each entry was a brick in the wall I was building against her lies. Davis called me 2 nights later, his voice low and tense. I followed her. She leaves the bed almost every night. Sometimes she meets Thorne in his office. Sometimes they slip out the side door into the parking lot. I've got photos, timestamps. She's not only awake Ellie, she's an accomplice. My hand tightened around the phone until my knuckles whitened. So it's true, all of it. Worse than you think, Davis replied. This isn't just about faking a coma. I think they're planning an insurance scam, maybe more. But don't worry. I'll get enough proof to bring them down. You just need to hold on. When I hung up, I sat in the dark kitchen, my heart pounding. Fear still gnawed at me, but something else had risen inside resolve. For weeks, I had been stumbling in confusion, begging for scraps of clarity. Now I saw the path. They thought they could deceive me, silence me, break me. But they underestimated a mother's endurance, a grandmother's fire. I whisper this to you, whoever hears my story. Have you ever felt the shift, the moment when grief turns to rage, when helplessness hardens into defiance? That night, I felt it. I was no longer prey. I was waiting, watching, preparing. If you were in my place, carrying the weight of betrayal and holding the first sparks of truth in your hands, what would you do? Would you run and hide, hoping danger passes you by? Or would you sharpen your courage and wait for the moment to strike? Comment 1 if you believe silence only feeds the liar. Hit like if you believe timing is the most powerful weapon of all. It was past midnight when I finally gathered the courage to do what had haunted my thoughts for days. The hospital was silent, the hall's dimly lit shadows stretching long and heavy across the sterile floors. My heart pounded so violently, I feared it might echo in the corridors. I walked slowly each step, carrying me closer to the room where the truth lay hidden under white sheets. Through the glass, Chandra lay as still as always, her body tangled in wires, her chest rising with mechanical precision. For anyone else, she was the picture of fragility, the tragic wife clinging to life. But to me, she was a mask, a performer waiting for her next act. I pressed my hand against the cold handle of the door. For weeks I had watched recorded whispered in secret. Tonight I needed to look her in the eye. Tonight I needed her to know that I knew. The door creaked softly as I entered. The air was thick with disinfectant, the steady beep of the monitor filling the room like a metronome of deceit. I stood at the edge of her bed, staring at her pale face. For a moment, I almost faltered. She looked so peaceful. So helpless. A part of me wanted to believe it had all been a nightmare, that she was truly sick, that my suspicions were the madness of an exhausted old woman. But then I remembered the laugh, soft and mocking, echoing through the hall. I remembered the sight of her walking steadily toward Thorne's office. I remembered the letter taped to my door, the debt collector's threats, Marcus's hollow eyes, Eli's broken innocence. And all doubt turned to fire. I leaned forward, my voice barely above a whisper. Enough, Chandra. The performance is over. Wake up. At first, nothing. The machines beeped steadily, her body unmoving. My hands trembled, but I pressed on my voice firmer. I know you're awake. I know you've been walking, drinking meeting with him. Stop this charade. Her eyelids fluttered, just slightly, like the wing of a moth. My breath caught. And then slowly, deliberately, her eyes opened. They were not the eyes of a patient in despair. They were sharp, alert, glittering with calculation. A cold smile curved at the corner of her lips. Well, she whispered, her voice hoarse but laced with venom, so the old woman finally figured it out. My stomach turned, my hands gripping the rail of her bed so tightly my knuckles whitened. How dare you, I hissed. My son is destroying himself. My grandson cries himself to sleep. And you. My voice broke, rage choking me. You sit here laughing at us all. Chandra pushed herself up slightly, her movement slow but steady like a cat stretching after a nap. Marcus is weak, she sneered. Always was. He clings to me because, without me, he's nothing. And Eli children forget. He'll grow up and move on. But me. Her eyes narrowed. I have plans bigger than this family. Plans you can't begin to imagine. Tears blurred my vision, but I refused to let them fall. Why I demanded? Why torment them like this? Why pretend? She tilted her head, her smile widening. Because grief pays better than love. Because insurance pays better than honesty. Because I was never meant to rot in this little life your son offered me. Do you think I wanted to spend years in that bakery smelling of flour counting pennies? No, I wanted more. And I found someone who can give it to me. Her words sliced through me, but I forced myself to stand taller. You mean Thorn? Her eyes glimmered at the name. Finally. Yes, he understands me. He sees me. Together we're building a future. And soon when the money comes through, we'll be far away while Marcus drowns in his pity. I shook my head, disbelief mixing with fury. You're a monster. You've fooled an entire family, an entire hospital just to feed your greed. Chandra leaned closer, her voice dropping to a hiss. And you, dear mother-in-law, are in the way. Do you think no one knows you've been snooping? That letter you found. That was just a warning. Push me again, and I promise you'll regret it. My hands shook, but I refused to look away. I will not be silent. Not for you, not for anyone. My son deserves the truth. Eli deserves a mother who doesn't lie with every breath. And I will not let you destroy what little we have left. Her smile faded into something sharper, more dangerous. If you tell Marcus, he won't believe you. He'll think you're jealous, bitter, desperate for attention. He'll choose me over you every time. He already has. Haven't you noticed? The words struck like a whip. She was right, Marcus had already turned against me, blinded by his devotion to her. But I swallowed the pain, refusing to let her see me break. Maybe he won't believe me now, I said, my voice steady. But when I bring proof, when the world sees what you've done, your mask will crumble. Chandra leaned back, resting against the pillows, as if the conversation had been nothing but amusement. Then I suppose we're at war, you and I. But remember, this old woman wars have casualties, and I don't mind adding you to the list. Her words lingered in the air, heavy and poisonous. I stood frozen, my chest heaving, my body trembling. I wanted to scream, to strike, to drag Marcus into the room and force him to see the devil he had married. But I turned instead, gripping the door handle with all the strength I had left. As I stepped into the hallway, my legs nearly gave out. My breath came in ragged gasps, my hands clammy. But inside, beneath the fear, a fire burned hotter than ever. She had shown her face to me. She had revealed the darkness in her heart. And now I knew without doubt this wasn't just a lie. This was war. I whisper this to you now as I confess what I saw, what I heard. Would you have walked away as I did, carrying the fire in silence, waiting for the right moment to strike? Or would you have dragged the truth into the light that very night, no matter the cost? Comment 1 if you believe silence in that moment was strength. Hit like if you believe I should have exposed her then and there, even if it destroyed my son in the process. The morning of reckoning arrived with a heaviness I cannot describe. Even the sun seemed reluctant to rise its light, pale and thin through the blinds of my kitchen. I hadn't slept. I sat all night at the table with the USB drive in my pocket, Davis's photos spread before me, and Eli's quiet breathing drifting from the next room. Today was the day the masks would fall. When Marcus arrived to pick me up, his face was drawn, his eyes hollow, but his shirt was clean for once. He didn't speak much on the drive, only whispered, "They said it's bad, Mom. We need to be there when they make the decision." His voice cracked, and I gripped the handle of my seat to keep from shouting the truth right there. The hospital was crowded with family, cousins, and neighbors who had come to say their goodbyes. The air was thick with the sterile stench of disinfectant and the murmur of prayers. I walked the halls like a ghost, clutching Eli's hand tightly. He looked up at me with wide eyes, fear swimming in them, but there was also something else, a quiet strength I hadn't seen before. Inside the room, Chandra lay motionless as ever, her pale face illuminated by the soft glow of the machines. Marcus went straight to her side, gripping her hand, tears running down his cheeks. "My love," he whispered. "If you can hear me, please, don't leave me." His sobs tore at my heart, and yet fury burned in me because I knew she was listening. I knew she was savoring every drop of his devotion. Then Dr. Thorne entered. His white coat seemed too crisp, too polished, his solemn expression carefully arranged. He carried a file in his hand, his voice measured and heavy. "Mrs. Hayes, Mr. Hayes, I'm afraid the situation has worsened. We've done everything possible, but her brain activity has declined. It's time to prepare for the worst. I will sign the final prognosis." The room erupted with sobs. Marcus collapsed against the bed, pressing his face to Chandra's lifeless arm. Relatives clung to each other, crying prayers into the sterile air. I stood frozen, my fists clenched, watching Thorne raise his pen over the document. This was their grand finale, the curtain call of their cruel performance. And then the door burst open. The sound of boots against the tile, firm and unyielding. Captain Coleman entered, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. Her voice was clear, sharp as a blade. "Dr. Alan Thorne, Chandra Ortega. You are under arrest for insurance fraud, conspiracy, and attempted deception." Gasps filled the room. Thorne froze his pen, hovering above the paper. Chandra's eyelids fluttered, then flew open. She bolted upright, her voice shrill and panicked. "What? This is slander. You can't prove anything." The relatives screamed. Some clutched their chests. Others stumbled back, their eyes wide with horror. Marcus staggered to his feet, staring at his wife, who had supposedly been at death's door, his face drained of color. "Chandra." His voice was barely a whisper, broken and disbelieving. Coleman stepped forward, her gaze icy. "We have proof. Photographs of you walking, recordings of your meetings with Dr. Thorne, and insurance documents signed in secret. Your performance is over." "No!" Chandra shrieked, leaping from the bed, her hospital gown fluttering. She rushed to Marcus, clutching his arms. "Please listen to me. I had no choice. I was drowning in debt. I did it for us, for our future. You have to believe me." Marcus trembled, his eyes wet with tears. "For us? For our future. You let our son cry every night. You let me waste away believing you were dying. How could you do this to us?" Her voice cracked, desperation twisting her face. "I did it for the money. For a better life, can't you see? We could have left all of this behind." And then the moment that silenced the entire room. Eli, my sweet grandson, stepped forward. His small hands clutched his old phone, his eyes blazing with courage far beyond his years. He pressed a button, and the screen lit up. The video played, the one where Chandra opened her eyes, drank water, stretched, and lay back down, feigning unconsciousness. The sound echoed through the room, undeniable, unerasable. The crowd gasped. Marcus stared at the screen, his mouth open, his body trembling. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he turned back to his wife. Eli saw. My own son saw the truth, and you made him carry it in silence. You destroyed him. His voice broke into a sob that echoed off the sterile walls. Chandra fell to her knees, sobbing, clawing at Marcus's hands. "Please, I love you. Forgive me." But Marcus pulled away, his face twisted with rage and heartbreak. "No, you loved money. You loved lies. You never loved us." Thorne stood silent, his head bowed as if the weight of his own greed had crushed him at last. Coleman gave the order, and the officers stepped forward. Cold metal clicked as handcuffs locked around their wrists. Chandra struggled, screaming. "I was desperate. You can't do this." But her words were swallowed by the sound of her chains and the murmur of horrified relatives. As they dragged her from the room, silence fell. Only Marcus's ragged sobs and Eli's quiet sniffles broke the stillness. The mask had fallen. The truth was laid bare for all to see. I stepped forward, placing a trembling hand on my son's shoulder. His body shook under my touch. "It's over, Marcus. The truth has come. I know it hurts, but we will survive this. For Eli." He looked up at me. His face ravaged, his voice a broken whisper. "How do we move on from this, Mom? How do we live after she's destroyed everything?" I held his gaze, tears filling my eyes. We live because we must, because Eli needs us, because we are still here. And in that moment, though, the room reeked of betrayal and despair. I felt a strange peace settle in my chest. The storm had broken. The lies had been exposed. And while the wreckage lay around us, at least the truth was no longer hidden in the shadows. I ask you, those who listen to my story, if you had been in that room, would you have felt pity for her tears? Or would you like me see them for what they were? Just another performance too late to save her. Comment 1 if you believe betrayal can never be forgiven. Hit. Like if you think even liars deserve mercy in the end. The days after their arrest felt like living in the eye of a hurricane. For weeks, my life had been consumed by whispers, shadows, and secrets, and now all of it had erupted into the open. But the storm didn't stop at the walls of our family. No, it spread outward, burning through every corner of the community like fire in dry grass. The hospital became a stage of its own, swarming with reporters, flashing cameras, and whispers so sharp they cut through the sterile air. Headlines screamed across newspapers, "Doctor and patient conspire in insurance scam." The faces of Thorne and Chandra, once respected, now stared from front pages with the shame of criminals. People pointed at the hospital entrance, their voices carrying outrage. How could this happen under our noses? And then came Sarah. For so long, she had been a shadow in this play, trembling in silence, carrying orders too heavy for her young shoulders. But now, under oath, she stepped forward. Her voice shook, but her words were steady. Yes, I saw her move. Yes, Dr. Thorne instructed me to remain silent. I feared for my job, but I knew it was wrong. The courtroom gasped, the world outside gasped, and for the first time, Sarah's eyes met mine without fear. I nodded to her silently, thanking her for finding the courage I had begged the heavens for. Her testimony was a spark igniting others. Neighbors who once whispered behind closed doors now came forward. One by one, they admitted what they'd seen, the late-night shadows slipping from the hospital, the unfamiliar men lingering in alleys, the sudden changes in Chandra's appearance. What had been dismissed as paranoia became undeniable proof. Even the debt collectors played their part. Their threats now turned into confessions under police questioning. She promised us the insurance money. One of them growled in court, his tattoos peeking from beneath his shirt cuffs. Said she'd pay every cent once the papers were signed. We didn't care how, as long as we got paid. Every word added fuel to the fire, and what once was just my family's shame became a scandal too large to ignore. Chandra and Thorne were no longer just deceivers of a grieving husband. They were deceivers of a whole community. For Marcus, this public exposure was both torment and salvation. He could no longer deny the truth. Each headline, each testimony, each piece of evidence crushed the illusion he had clung to. I watched him in court, his face pale, his jaw clenched, as Sarah's words echoed through the room. When the photos appeared on the screen, Chandra walking freely into Thorne's office, he buried his face in his hands. Eli sat beside me, his small fingers gripping mine tightly, and I whispered to him, "It's almost over, sweetheart. The world sees it now." But with exposure came humiliation. At the bakery, customers who once greeted me warmly now approached with awkward silence, their eyes darting away as though ashamed to have been part of the whispers. Others came with pity, laying hands on mine and murmuring, "We didn't know Ellie. We're so sorry." Their compassion was kind, but it also reminded me of every day I had walked these streets carrying the weight alone judged as a delusional old woman. At night, when the cameras moved on and the crowds dispersed, I sat with Marcus in our kitchen, the table littered with unpaid bills and empty glasses. He looked at me, his eyes red but clearer than they had been in months. "You were right, Mom," he whispered. "All along you saw what I refused to see. And I hated you for it." His voice cracked, tears spilling down his cheeks. "Can you forgive me?" I took his hand, squeezing it tight, though my own fingers trembled. "There is nothing to forgive. You were blinded by love. Anyone could be. But now you must open your eyes for Eli. He needs you strong." The scandal spread beyond Atlanta. Reporters from neighboring states arrived, their microphones thrust toward me. Their questions relentless. "Mrs. Hayes, how did you discover the truth? How did it feel to watch your daughter-in-law betray you?" Their words felt invasive, but I answered as best I could, my voice steady. "The truth is always heavier than lies, but silence is heavier still." I chose to speak because my family deserved better, and still the fire grew. On talk shows, commentators debated whether Chandra was a victim of desperation or a villain of greed. Strangers sent letters to my bakery, some with sympathy, others with anger demanding harsher punishment. My private pain had become public spectacle. Yet amidst the chaos, there was a strange comfort. I was no longer alone. The burden I had carried in silence was now shared by 1,000 voices, 1,000 eyes that saw what I had seen. The lies were no longer hidden. They were burned into the light for all to witness. I tell you this confessing from the depths of my heart. Truth does not stay locked forever. No matter how carefully lies are spun, no matter how many play their roles, truth always finds a witness, a voice, a stage. And when it does, it spreads like wildfire, unstoppable, uncontainable. So I ask you, if you carried a secret that could destroy not only your family, but also shatter the trust of an entire community, would you dare to speak it? Or would you stay silent, hoping someone else would light the match? Comment 1 if you believe silence is betrayal. Hit like if you believe truth, even when it burns, is the only path forward. The gavel struck, and with it the weight of months of torment seemed to lift, though not without leaving scars. The courtroom was silent except for the judge's steady voice reading the sentence. Dr. Alan Thorne, 6 years in federal prison for insurance fraud, conspiracy, and professional misconduct. Chandra Ortega, 5 years for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted deception. Both ordered to repay damages, both stripped of any respect they once carried. When the officers led them away in chains, I did not feel triumph. I felt a hollow ache. Chandra's cries rang through the room, pleas for mercy, claims of desperation, excuses wrapped in tears. But no one believed her anymore. Even her own relatives who had once wept at her bedside turned away, their faces hard with betrayal. Thorne kept his head bowed as silence, an admission of guilt heavier than words. The world outside turned quickly. Newspapers splashed their photos with headlines of shame. The hospital announced sweeping reforms, desperate to restore its shattered reputation. Neighbors who once pitied us now crossed the street to shake my hand, their voices filled with apologies. "We misjudged you, Ellie. We should have trusted you sooner." But their words could not erase the months I had lived as a pariah, whispered about, doubted, alone. At home, Marcus was a different man, thinner, quieter, his eyes haunted. But the bottle no longer ruled him. I watched him pour the last of his liquor down the sink one night, his hand shaking but steady in resolve. "No more," he whispered. "For Eli, for myself." It was the first step of many, but it was a step. Eli bloomed slowly like a flower after a storm. His laughter returned in bursts, fragile at first, then stronger. He began to draw again pictures of us 3, hand in hand under the sun. One evening he looked at me with wide eyes and asked, "Grandma, is Mom coming back?" My heart twisted, but I smiled gently. Some people choose to leave Eli, but what matters is that we're still here for each other. He nodded, a small smile forming as though he understood more than his years allowed. The bakery, once suffocating under shame, filled again with the scent of warm bread and the chatter of loyal customers. People lingered at the counter not just for bread, but to tell me, "You gave us courage, Mrs. Hayes. You stood up when no one else would." Their words warmed me, though I never sought recognition. I had done what I had to do, not for applause, but for survival, for dignity, for my family. And yet even in the quiet of night, shadows lingered. Sometimes I caught Marcus staring out the window, his eyes lost in memories of the woman he had loved, the woman who had betrayed him so completely. I would place a hand on his shoulder, but words never came. Healing is slow, and some wounds never close fully, but at least they no longer bled in silence. As for me, I felt older, wearier, but strangely lighter. The burden I had carried alone for so long was gone, burned away in the fire of truth. I still woke before dawn, still kneaded dough with aching hands, still wiped the counters of my little bakery. But now, when I opened the doors, I no longer feared the stares of neighbors or the whispers behind my back. Now when I looked at my grandson's smile, I knew I had done the right thing. I confess this to you now: truth does not heal without pain. It destroys before it rebuilds. But in its destruction, it leaves room for something new, something honest. Chandra lost her freedom. Thorne lost his career. Marcus lost the illusion of the woman he loved. And I, though scarred, though weary, found peace in knowing I had saved my family from drowning in lies. I ask you this as I end my confession of what happened when betrayal cuts this deep, when lies unravel everything you hold dear. What is the greater mercy, to forgive or to let justice fall? Comment 1 if you believe betrayal can never be forgiven. Hit like if you believe that even liars deserve a second chance. The storm had passed, but the echoes of it still lingered. Some mornings I woke expecting to hear the harsh beeping of hospital machines, expecting to see Marcus's broken face or Eli's wide, frightened eyes. Instead, I heard the soft hum of my oven, the steady rhythm of kneading dough, the sound of Eli's laughter drifting through the kitchen as he colored at the table. Life had not returned to what it was, before it never could, but it had begun to breathe again. I looked at Marcus and saw a man rebuilding himself piece by piece. He found work at a mechanic's shop, fixing engines with hands that once only held grief. His back was straighter now, his eyes clearer. In the evenings, he read to Eli, his voice steady, though sometimes it faltered when the boy asked about his mother. He never spoke her name anymore. Instead, he promised Eli, "I will always be here. You won't be alone." Those words were not perfect, but they were true, and that was enough. Eli healed faster than I dared hope. Children carry wounds, yes, but they also carry resilience. His drawings filled the walls of my small house stick figures of him, his father and me, standing beneath bright suns and blue skies. Sometimes he still asked in his small, trembling voice, "Will Mom ever come back?" Each time I would take his hand and answer gently, "Some people choose to walk away, Eli, but the ones who stay, that is family." He would nod his eyes heavy with thought, and then he would smile because he knew he was loved. The bakery became more than just a place for bread. It became a place for community, for truth. Customers who once whispered now lingered to share their own stories, stories of betrayal, of secrets of resilience. They told me, "You gave us courage. You showed us that even in the darkest lies, truth can survive." Their words humbled me, but also reminded me that my pain had not been for nothing. Out of the ashes of my family's shame had come something larger, a reminder that deception, no matter how carefully staged, cannot last forever. At night when the world was quiet, I sometimes sat by the window with a cup of tea staring at the stars. I thought of Robert, my late husband, and whispered, "We survived love. It nearly destroyed us, but we survived." I imagined him smiling his hand on my shoulder, proud that I had carried the family through the fire. The grief never left, but it softened into memory, into strength. And as for Chandra, she was gone from our lives, locked behind bars, where her lies could harm no one else. There were moments when guilt tried to creep in, moments when I wondered if she had truly loved Marcus once, if desperation had twisted her into someone unrecognizable. But then I remembered Eli's trembling whisper, "Mom isn't sick." I remembered the cold smile on her lips when she admitted her scheme, and I knew she had made her choices. She had chosen lies over love, greed over family. Justice was not cruelty, it was consequence. I confess to you as I close this chapter of my story that I am not the same woman I was before. I am older, wearier, my heart scarred, but I am also stronger. I learned that silence is its own kind of betrayal, that sometimes love means standing against the very people you once called family. I learned that dignity cannot be stolen by lies, only surrendered to them, and I refuse to surrender. So now when Eli laughs, when Marcus stands taller, when the smell of fresh bread fills my bakery at dawn, I feel a peace I once thought impossible. We are not whole, but we are alive. We are together, and together, we are enough. To those who hear my story, I leave you with this truth: lies may sleep, but they always wake. Deceit may masquerade as weakness, but one day it reveals its face. And when it does, the only shield we have is courage. If you were in my place, if the ones you loved most betrayed you with such cruelty, would you have had the strength to expose them? Or would you have stayed silent to preserve the illusion? One, if you believe truth must always be spoken, no matter the cost. Hit. Like if you believe even in silence, dignity can never be faked. Because in the end, one lesson remains above all: dignity cannot be false. Truth always awakens even from the deepest of lies.